All right, so welcome to our next presentation, and I'll let our presenter take it away.
All right, well, thank you very much. Hello, everyone. My name is Marisa Lucian, and I'm a teacher at Meikai University, a private university in Chiba. My presentation today is on how to teach sarcasm to EFL university students here in Japan. Just to start off with, where the contents of this presentation are going to be the introduction, some background on sarcasm, a past workshop I did, and some feedback from students. For the methodology section you see there, I was supposed to do a, experiment this year, but as many people know, there's a certain virus going around that made that a little bit difficult. And so hopefully that will happen next year. All right, so let's start off with some sarcasm. So sarcasm is a pretty prevalent form of humor in many Western English-speaking countries, and it is an incredibly difficult form of humor for L2 learners to learn. So I decided to create a workshop to help students learn sarcasm, and this is what I came up with. First, for some background, what is humor? Well, if we look at Attardo and what he wrote in some of his research, humor is an utterance or action that flips the script on cultural norms of a society. So this means that it's the opposite of what you would expect. This requires cultural knowledge of the society on what is being flipped, but also it requires the cultural knowledge of what you are allowed to flip, because some things are completely taboo depending on the culture. So here, I actually have looked up the world's oldest recorded joke. So for just a couple seconds, I want you to close your eyes and think, what do you think the topic of the world's oldest joke is? So I'll just do a quick countdown. So 3, 2, 1. Something which has never occurred since time immemorial. A young woman did not fart in her husband's lap. So if you look at this, the oldest joke in the world from 1900 BC Sumeria is a fart joke. Certain forms of humor are pretty universal across space and time. Unfortunately, sarcasm is not one of those. So, a little bit of background on humor and language. Humor is a big part of most social interactions that people have across peoples, time, cultures. Everyone has their form of humor, and that's very intimately connected to human nature. Just like the aforementioned potty humor is quite common in different cultures. However, many other forms of humor rely on cultural in-group knowledge to understand and execute, and this is where sarcasm lies. So what is sarcasm? Sarcasm is the use of irony to mock others or to display contempt by saying the opposite of what one actually means. I will make a quick note to say that in my workshops, we focus on mocking our friends and not being contemptuous of other people to keep things in a positive light. So this flipping of what one actually means that sarcasm falls under the category of faulty reasoning humor, which can make it very difficult to understand for non-native speakers. Not only do they first need to understand what someone is saying in English, they then need to understand they have to flip it. So some quick examples of sarcasm, just in case we have some people here who don't divulge in it as much as I do. Say, for example, someone walked outside and they find that it's cold and raining, and they turn to their friend and go, "Oh, what lovely weather we're having. Let's have a picnic. We can go off, into the park." Or your best friend stayed up on League of Legends all night and he didn't study for his math test and he failed it. And you go, "Wow, great job. You nailed it. Awesome." These are just kind of fun ways of being sarcastic and playing around with your friends that are pretty common in a lot of English-speaking countries. So why teach sarcasm is another question that people might ask. And the reason sarcasm can be so important is that you need to be able to effectively understand and use humor, because humor is an important part of overall communicative competence. people joke with their friends and their colleagues all the time. And if you're not able to do it, you're going to be missing out on a lot of different language going on around you. There's also a lot of positive, significant impacts on L2 students if they're able to master their L2 humor. So what are some of these positive impacts? First, increased confidence is one. They're more likely to speak in different situations because they feel more confident in their abilities. Second, it gains them better social standing, especially in the language group that they're learning. Next, this also increases their ability to be welcomed into native speaker groups. And that leads to better language outcomes because they're surrounded by more native speakers. They're getting more language input if, for example, they're studying abroad. And this humor is one of the things that allows them to do this. So in general, we can say that there are 3 steps to understanding humor. First, you need to recognize that a joke is being made. This is where a lot of L2 learners mess up, is they don't understand the language or they don't understand that a joke is even happening. Next, they need to understand the cultural context behind the humor. So this is where it would come in that the student would need to know, oh, this is sarcastic. I have to flip the meaning. And then third, you have to appreciate the humor. Not everyone has the same style. I might love sarcasm being raised on it, but others don't appreciate it quite as much. And people are going to differ on that regardless of their L1. So again, why is sarcasm so difficult? One, it uses faulty reasoning, like we mentioned before. So that means that listeners need to rely on what are called play frames to distinguish sarcasm from regular speech. Play frames are things like body language, marked vocabulary, intonation differences, etc. All right, so let's get into the workshop that I created. So this workshop I did last year with 12 participants, and they varied quite widely in their levels from Cepher A1 to B2+. Sarcasm is actually unique in that you don't need so much language to understand that sarcasm is happening. There were 8 English majors and 4 non-English majors, and it was a 90-minute workshop. I'd also like to make another quick note that this is based on more overt styles of American sarcasm and not subtler styles of sarcasm. You have to learn to crawl before you can learn to walk. All right, so the workshop structure went from teaching the students what sarcasm is, tone and intonation practice, worksheet practice, a body language practice section, and then creating their own pair work role plays. So first, you need to introduce sarcasm to them. A lot of students at the time didn't know what sarcasm was, and so this is very important to introduce to the students. Next, you need to practice tone and intonation. So in sarcasm, this is one of the play frames that's most important for L2 learners to learn. So for example, here from the workshop that I did, you could have an extended vowel in this sentence. Why can't it rain all year? So these kinds of play frames are a linguistic cue that I am being sarcastic and you shouldn't take the words I'm saying seriously. So students practiced placing the intonation curves in the marked vocabulary and did drill practices to try and match that intonation. Next, we did a quiz. So there's a really useful website, a social communication website, where they have lots of quizzes where they have 2 videos, and they say the same things, but in one, they're being sarcastic, and the other, they're being sincere. So students have to be able to distinguish which audio has the sarcasm, and then you can ask students questions about, well, why do you think they're being sarcastic? What do you think they mean by this? What's the opposite? This was an incredibly useful website, so I really, really recommend it. They also had videos and other things on here. So I just want to plug this website because it's just really, really useful. It's created by Dr. Mary Shapiro at the Truman State University in America. And this website not only has different practices on sarcasm, but different social communication skills like turn taking, topic changes, flirting, showing interest in different things. There's lots of different interesting workshops and things that you can use on here. So I really recommend checking out this website. Okay, so after the students practiced their intonations and did their audio quiz, I then put them into pairs with this pre-made sarcasm worksheet where they had to place their own intonation curves and stress. And after checking that they were correct, they had to practice with their partners. As you can see, they're not conversations. And what I instructed the students to do at the time was to try and overact their partner. So they would need to, if their partner was a little weak, they would go higher, 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 higher to try and get more and more of a reaction out of them. Next, and personally, this was my favorite part of the entire workshop, was the body language section. So here, this is when I got to use gifs, or as some people say, gifs, in the workshop. So body language is a huge part of sarcasm. It's one of the biggest play frames that you can have, and it's a very easy cue. And so, sorry, I was just checking the chat to make sure nothing was wrong. So this is an incredibly easy cue for people to see, regardless of whether or not they started learning English yesterday or they've been learning for years. Sarcasm is very prevalent in media, so it's very easy to get GIFs. And I gotta tell you, it is so much fun to practice eye rolling exercises with your students. They really get into it. They really enjoy it.
I have to announce that you're about 13 minutes out now.
Okay, thank you. All right, so using GIFs in media with the students can be very, very helpful. One is that it creates engaging examples for the students to see. And because of the fact that GIFs constantly repeat, they're getting that input over and over and over and over again. It makes it very easy to understand, and it really connects the students to what you're teaching. Try and find me a student who hasn't seen Harry Potter in Japan. It might be a bit difficult. They probably haven't read the books, but they've definitely seen this face at some point in the movies. If you're also interested in adding GIFs to your PowerPoint, just a quick plug on how to do it. It's actually really easy. You just have to download and save the GIF and then go to your insert picture in your PowerPoint. You can't copy save, that won't work. You got to download it and save it. I promise it's easier than you think it is to get this into your PowerPoints, and it really livens things up in your classroom. All right. After we did some body language practice with the students and did fun drills of slow claps and eye rolls, we then did a video quiz. So this is a clip of Foster's Home from Imaginary Friends from YouTube, where this character, whose name I cannot remember, helps this character, Blue, whose name is very easy to remember, what sarcasm is. So it's a very short clip of about 1 minute and 30 seconds where there's tons of sarcasm. So students just had to raise their hand when they recognized that sarcasm was being made. They did not focus on the actual jokes because they were speaking at a native speed and the lower level learners were not going to be able to keep up, but they were able to identify when people were being sarcastic. And as you remember, that's the first step to being able to understand and appreciate a joke is, a joke is happening. Okay. Finally, the last step in the workshop was where students could create their own role play scenarios. I gave them some examples that they could use, or they could create their complete own scenarios. The students were all pretty successful in creating them. Some obviously leaned into it a bit more than others, but overall, the students had a ton of fun. Okay, so some results from last year's workshop. First, all 12 students who came were able to create their own sarcastic situations, and they were able to recognize sarcasm. So I see that as a pretty big success. Students really enjoyed the workshop and they wanted to do more. And I was also asked specifically for more body language workshops, which I think is an interesting thing to point out. A lot of the students mentioned that they never really learned about body language and how to carry yourself and how to read the people around you in a foreign culture, even though that's a big part of communication. So this might open up more avenues for different types of workshops to do in the future. Another result was that my students realized how sarcastic I am in class, so I had to start being a little more careful. And a fun one was that a lot of my students would try and practice sarcasm outside of class with me. So they'd come in and they'd try and just start the day off with a joke. It was their way of practicing and keeping up with it, which made me really happy that they continued with that. About a month afterward, I did some participant interviews. I interviewed 2 students. The first student felt that his ability to recognize sarcasm had increased his understanding of American media. He mentioned specifically that beforehand, when he was watching American sitcoms, the laugh track would go off and he would understand that there had been a joke. But then because of this workshop, he was able to recognize, oh, they were sarcastic. He could read the English, figure out what the opposite meaning was supposed to be and what the joke was. So he felt he was able to understand American media better. Another student asked for more situations in which they could practice for if they met a foreign person or were able to study abroad, that they would be able to use sarcasm more readily and they would feel prepared. All right, so just going over the general workings of the 2019 workshop, it wasn't an experiment. So there was no pre-test or post-test. It was one 90-minute workshop with some post-student interviews. For the next time when I am able to do this workshop, I'd like to actually do an experiment with a pre-test, a post-test, and a quick survey, as well as a delayed post-test. I'd really like to see if the ability to recognize sarcasm lasts, or if this fades with time. I think that if it lasts, that would be really great. You could have a big impact on the students in a short amount of time. But at this current point, I'm not really sure how long-lasting this has been. The workshop and experiment goals for next time will be to increase student recognition and understanding of sarcastic statements, and for these effects to last and hopefully show up on the delayed post-test. And my last one is for students to increase speaking competence and confidence in humorous situations. I think that that confidence can really help with their motivation. For the pre, post, and delayed post tests, my plan is to have the students watch some short clips, and they would need to ask questions like who is being sarcastic, how can they tell the person is being sarcastic, and then what is the sarcastic comment, what's the joke, how should they flip the language. I think if the student is able to do this, then this represents that very first step. Because with the video test, you're able to see if the student can recognize that the joke is being made, which is really the first step. A student can try and make their own scenario and then make that in a closed setting. But if they're able to watch a situation and be able to understand it, that really shows that they've got a better grasp of sarcasm than just making 1 or 2 jokes. All right, so that's my presentation. Thank you for coming and listening today. So if you want any links from what I've been using here, or you've got any questions, I'm now available. So thank you so much for coming.
All right, everyone, we have 5 minutes for questions. So if you have a question, please unmute and ask away.
Did you choose this topic because you're sarcastic or?
Kind of. I actually started doing this when I was in Eikaiwa in Nagoya, and I would do my 1 coin lessons on sarcasm. So this was something that I really enjoyed doing. I used to use manzai to teach the students, but at my university now, it's very international, so I needed to find a new way to do it, and that's when I started using the gifs and media, which I think really helped.
Yeah, I wanted to just say that I think it's so important for students to understand sarcasm, because I remember years ago when I was working with a teacher who was absolutely lovely, and a lot of students in the school were scared of her. A lot of the students who'd come from Japan, and this was in Australia. And I couldn't understand why. And then one day we were in the elevator together, and this very slim girl, and she'd said to her friend, "Oh, since I came to Australia, I've put on so much weight. I need to go on a diet." And the teacher looked at her, and she's tiny. She said, "Oh yeah, that's because you're so fat." But obviously she was being sarcastic. But I heard the student talk to the others. She was mortified because the teacher had called her fat and didn't understand that it was supposed to be a joke saying, "But you're in great shape." And so then I finally clicked. This is why some of the students are scared of this teacher. She's very sarcastic, and they're just taking it literally. So it's really valuable for students to understand sarcasm, because they're going to meet sarcastic people.
Like me. I had that happen last year. It was pouring rain, and I was like, "Oh, do you all want to go outside? Wouldn't it be great?" And they just looked at me like I must have hit my head on the way to school. Any other questions?
Do you think you could, for like advanced students or intermediate students, would you be able to use like Trevor Noah's video clips that includes kind of a lot of like, you need to know kind of the background, like American culture and background. Do you think that would be like too difficult to teach, or?
I don't think it would be too difficult to teach if you had the right students. So students who are interested in international news and humor and things like that, they would be ready to, dissect whatever it was. But like I mentioned I think at the beginning, is some people aren't humorous. Like I live and breathe sarcasm. Other English speakers don't. So you might have students who go, "Why would I care about the news?" or "Why would I care about a joke?" So if you have the right students, I don't think the level is too much of an issue. But you would definitely need to do a needs analysis of that class to see their level, what they might want to do.
Have you ever encountered any problems where maybe learners have gone a little bit too far in their sarcasm, or something like, like a fat joke that just went bad? So is there any pitfalls that we should be aware of?
So in my workshop, that's a really good question. In my workshop, I started by saying that this was a type of humor it was easy to insult people. And so to only do it with your friends or people who knew you were going to be sarcastic. So I think I would add that caveat. I have personally never had a student say anything to me. And one of the students who was practicing with me generally bemoaned the fact that he could only practice with me because he was afraid of insulting other people. So either I just had a good group of kids, or the warning worked. So far, no hiccups, but that could totally happen probably in the future.
Got it. Yeah, warning, definitely.
There were a couple questions in the chat. I don't know if you'd seen them.
Yeah, I'm just pulling them up now. Let's see. Okay, someone posted the link. And let's see. Someone wanted my slides. I don't have. Do you mean the links in my slides or my slides themselves? Tiffany? Okay, the links, yeah, no problem. I can totally copy paste the links into the chat right now. Any other questions? Would be interesting to study? Yeah, it would be interesting to study sarcasm in different family settings.
I have a question, if anybody else. I was wondering, Marisa, is there any other aspect of humor that you also delved into aside from sarcasm, like maybe self-deprecation or?
I tried puns and that was an utter disaster. I think with puns, you really need linguistic abilities, and I hadn't really prepared much for that. Like I didn't say on my workshop flyer, like, oh, you need to have a certain level of English. So I had a lot of low level people who
Right.
just didn't know what the words were. So they couldn't make the word puns. But in sarcasm, I feel like that's a bit easier. You can read people and you can use very simple language and be sarcastic.
Right.
But my puns workshop was horrible. The students left in a very bad mood.
I guess
I'm so sorry that sorry, we have to end here because the next presentation is coming up. But could everybody unmute and say thank you to Marisa for this amazing job? Great presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marisa.
Thank you.
All right, and of course you can all head over to the Hangouts chat room if you want to keep going with the conversation. Just search for Hangouts there in the list. All right, and I'm going to end the recording now.